Hi, I'm Adam Cooper, founder and president of Ascent Consulting, and this is our Hot Takes podcast. Here, we're going to sit down and chat about what's going on in the construction industry. Our consulting team members have spent decades working in construction, everything from operations, project management, finance, marketing, field operations, you name it. Now, we work with construction companies every day to help improve their business, and in doing that, we uncover lots of problems, obstacles, challenges that they and other construction companies are often facing. So now, in this podcast, we're going to bring some of our unique thoughts, insights, and advice to you directly. I hope you find it helpful. And if you enjoy our podcast, please don't forget to let us know by liking, commenting, and inviting your friends to listen as well. And now, let's get to the episode.
So, Jeff, one of the things that we talked about with Greg last time he and I sat down, we started from, kind of his point of view working with current and past clients. What were some current maybe trends that stood out or some kind of recurring maybe problems or situations that clients kind of were getting themselves in? We ended up focusing on, project financials with his, specialty and background, and talked about the differences between some different specific financial statements that, a company is going to want to understand the difference between. Same type of thing for you. I was curious whether it be, project financials or other topics. I'm curious, are there any current, trends that you're seeing with your current or past projects, or are there any, kind of recurring problems that companies are running into? I was just kind of curious what you're seeing that really stands out to you right now as far as problems that companies are coming to you with, hoping that you can offer advice on.
Kind of spinning off the financial side of it from Greg's perspective, he's looking at it from a company standpoint. A very common thing we see is that project managers have a low financial IQ. That's very common in the industry. So that shows up in a few different ways. Anywhere from the project manager not being made profit loss responsible for the project, which is a best practice. That's what you want. That kind of looks like, treating your project like a little mini business, right? Running, taking responsibility for the costs against the budget of the project. Surprisingly, a lot of construction companies these days don't set their projects up that way. They don't see their project managers as that. They just don't see them that way. Some of that could be a recognition of incompetency. Like I said, their financial IQ is low. Therefore, we can't make them responsible for it. It could be, it's sort of a chicken and the egg sort of thing. Like, which is it? Is it that they don't know, or you don't want to give it to them because they don't know, or, so there's always something to tease out of that. But overall, I can say that project managers lack financial IQ, financial competency. As a general rule.
So what would maybe kind of stay in big picture? What would be some other areas where that could kind of creep up and kind of rear its head to being a problem kind of just throughout their operations, other than, of course, kind of, project management being one of the major ones?
It could crop up in that pay applications. Billing your client doesn't happen regularly, monthly. You should bill monthly. We come across clients that don't do that. Or another spin on that would be not turning in your pay applications on time, which if your client enforces the contract, will delay your payment. So it can show up that way. That's a fundamental lack of understanding of contract management, but it's tied to financials to a certain degree. Sometimes that shows up because responsibilities aren't clearly defined. Who is responsible for getting that out the door? One way that a challenge shows up there is that because it's money, people make accounting responsible for it. The problem with that is, and this is another common thing we see, is accounting receives a bill. So accounts payable, they receive an invoice for something. And we just sat through a demo for a piece of software that could solve this yesterday. An invoice comes in, AP sees it. Maybe they create commitments on their projects. Maybe they don't. but somehow or another, the project accountant pairs that up, matches it up with the project and pays it. And they have and commonly you'll hear accountants complain about that because they're like, I don't know whether that invoice is valid or not. I know that we buy stuff from that lumber company, but I don't know if what was on that invoice was actually delivered. I have no idea. And it doesn't occur to people to ask the field, hey, do you want to turn a delivery ticket in that we can match up with that invoice? That feels like a very basic function to me because that's how we did it as far back in my career as I can remember. But we see clients not doing that now. I don't know the why, but that happens. Another way that could show up is, and the consequences of that, I should say, are you pay for things that didn't get delivered or got delivered damaged or you got short ordered. You ordered 100 2x4s and you only got 50 of them. Accounting has no way of knowing that. I literally actually talked to a potential client yesterday that said that's how they do things. I talked to the CFO of a company that hopefully we're going to work with. And he said, our accountants just pay the bills. There's no connection to operations. He's new, so he's going to fix that. He recognizes it as a problem, but It's happened. It happens. So I don't know if that's a symptom, or I don't know if that's a symptom of project managers and having a lack of financial education or competency, or if it's again, I'm not sure which side is that? Is that a cart or a horse issue? It's probably circumstantial specific. The other way that shows up is in accounts receivable. So who prepares the pay app? A lot of clients see it as, well, that's money, therefore the accountant should do it. But the accountant has no idea how far along the project is. They haven't, and if the project manager is not talking to them and saying, oh, we're 50% complete, the accountant's looking at their cost to date and saying, well, we've spent 30% of the cost, so I'm going to bill 30%. But the project manager could say, no, we installed a bunch of stuff. We're 50% complete, but you haven't seen the bills yet. Nobody's billed you for that work. It just happened in the last 2 weeks. We did a lot in the last 2 weeks. We're farther along because the cost is always in arrears because somebody hasn't billed you for it yet. By contract, you should bill for work in place, not for cost incurred. That's not how most contracts work. Some are cost incurred, but for the most part, it's work in place. So you may not have the cost in your system yet. So these are all challenges that we face these a lot, and how this is a big topic for me because I'm an operations guy who understands how a dollar flows from the project through the company. And I know that a lot of people in the field don't, and they just don't even see it as their job. It's not their responsibility at all. But we hear accountants complain. Accountants, finance and operations don't always speak the same language. So there's consistently some conflict. There probably should be some healthy conflict there, but often we see unhealthy conflict where they don't see how they're on the same team at all.
And so the way to solve that, if I'm hearing you right, is just to make sure that you're always trying to align those interests between the project managers and the rest of the employees kind of working on the project, just to make sure everybody kind of knows everything's transparent and everybody knows kind of what team we're working on, that type of thing.
Yeah, sometimes, sure. It could be, I come from it from a very particular point of view that project managers should have a certain level of accounting competency and take responsibility that has to be given to them from the president or the top of the, whoever's running the business. That shows up in a lot of different ways. We've got a client right now where the project managers don't buy out their scopes of work. Pre-con does that. Buyout, for your sake, means signing up a subcontractor. It means looking at the scope of work and writing their scope of work out on a document and then issuing them a contract. That's what buyout means. Pre-con does it. That's not uncommon. It happens. I mean, that's a model that people use. Big companies do it, and project managers that have worked there just think, yeah, okay, if somebody else buys it out, and then I go manage that from there. That wasn't my experience. We were handed the project from pre-construction, and we went and bought everything out. We cut the deals with our subs because we were going to be the guy that managed it. So we developed those relationships, negotiated the deal, and then managed it from there. I could probably make a case on both of them, but it's for me where that shows up is accountability for that scope of work and ultimately the cost, being able to manage the deal that was cut. And, I suppose some people would argue, well, that gives you deniability as the project manager. So you can legitimately, plausibly say, I didn't know that was the deal you cut. Well, here's how we're doing it now, and get away with it. I'm not sure that's the best ethical way to approach that, but I know people set it up that way on purpose. It's a good cop, bad cop kind of a setup.
Right, definitely. And so you mentioned some good examples there as far as with how things can kind of get lost. Maybe your responsibility can kind of get taken away from the project managers when it comes to accounting, invoicing, and kind of things of that nature. Just kind of hearing that, are there any other areas within, operations or that the project managers, are going to or should have their hands, I should say, in kind of taking care of day to day that you think this can creep up? Like how else could, this lack of financial acumen, whichever way you look at it, maybe kind of rear its head to being an issue?
So it runs the gambit of how project managers don't have that financial acumen. A more advanced example would be just not understanding the basic profit calculation, knowing that your total contract is the total revenue that you're going to bill for, that you're going to send the customer bills for over the course of the project, and not understanding how to manage costs. Think about like, well, what's my labor cost against this project, and how much, do I have enough labor? How do you forecast labor? Material forecast, if you're not connected to the cost coming through the system as it's being produced, and you're not keeping track of that in any way, then you can't possibly know where you're going to end up at the end. So it's all connected, but we see these examples all the time.
Okay. And one thing I was thinking about too was maybe because it sounds like what I got definitely, I think you mentioned a couple of times in our other conversation the other day was maybe, back when kind of how when you were in the industry more so, it seemed like you were taking a more active role. You were explaining kind of in all these different, as a project manager in maybe all these different areas, right? Across maybe like the financials and accounting and the actual operations, like you're kind of having to wear a lot of hats, right? It sounds like. And so I was curious, what is, when you speak to a client today for projects more so related to, kind of aligning and making sure like the incentives and making sure like the project managers and everyone like that is working cohesively, what are some common traits that you feel like stand out or that are essential just overall for project managers in construction today to be able to be successful?
Great question. So in no particular order, because I'm kind of riffing here, a project manager needs to be organized. So a big part of project management is you have to keep track of a lot of things. Schedule, people, the owner, you're managing people, you're managing, maybe you're managing a whole team, maybe it's just you and the superintendent, but you still have to manage your client. You have to manage the subcontractors. So having the ability to keep track, a lot of balls in the air, as they say, you get a lot of things going on at one time. So being organized helps a lot in that. Being a good project manager means that what they taught us was the very first thing they taught us was know your contract. Actually, the way they told us was know your deal. So that means reading your contract, which surprisingly, a lot of project managers aren't given access to the prime contract that they're supposedly administering. So, you don't have to be a lawyer to read a contract and understand what are our responsibilities here? How are we supposed to bill for this project? What do I do if there's a delay? What do I do? What if there's a change? How do I manage that? All that's in the contract. Every one of those things, there is something in the contract there that'll tell you how to handle that. There's notice requirements. If something happens, you're required by contract to notify your client within a certain amount of time. It's different for every contract. Commonly, it's 2 or 3 days, but sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's less. So you have to read that and understand it. So successful project managers, this is true about superintendents as well. Successful construction project managers have a sense of urgency about them. They push. Time is literally money in construction. Most construction projects, there's a guarantee of time. You've given the owner a schedule and said you're going to be complete by a certain date. And there's consequences when you don't make that schedule. Maybe it's liquidated damages. It could be consequential, actual damages. So a sense of urgency and understanding how to push, not accepting, again, knowing notice requirements in your contract. If you haven't heard back from your client in a couple of days for a question you've asked, you call them. You don't just sit back and play victim and go, well, they never got back to me. I guess we'll just figure it out. That's a bad way to go about it. So having a sense of urgency is really, really important. I find that that's a really common trait for successful people that manage construction projects. Too much of a good thing is usually a bad thing. So a sense of urgency alone, it's a really good starting point. But if you don't couple that with good management skills, good people skills, good leadership skills, understanding how to move people and materials around. I used to tell young APMs and project engineers that I trained, they'd come to me and they say, I want to be a project manager. I want to be a project manager. I think I can be a PM now. I think, I can do all these things. I know I've checked all the boxes. And I used to tell them, okay, here's what to me being a PM means. I'm going to give you a piece of this project to manage. So let's pretend there's a pool to be built. Okay. And pools are a pain in the ass to build too, by the way. There's a whole lot of moving parts to it. It's a lot harder than you think it is. Assign them an area or a piece of the project and say, that's your responsibility. That little piece right there. You have to go manage all of the subs, the client, the architect, everything about that area, physical piece of this project is your responsibility. And I can tell profit. I can measure profit loss. I can measure schedule. I can measure all these things because I know, the small area that they're in charge of. And I'll tell them it's not about being able to write an RFI is a good skill to have. You need that. Being able to process a change order is a skill you have to have. Being able to read, understand, and manage a schedule, also important. But those are just like incremental things. You have to literally put all those things together in order to be successful. So I tell them, when you can imagine a future state, when you can see that area that you got to build, that building you got to build, or that pool or whatever, and you can imagine what it looks like when it's done. You can look ahead in time, look at a schedule, think about the incremental parts of it, think about when in the middle, what should we be working on? Toward the end, what should we be working on? Anticipate things. I used to call that looking around, being able to see around corners, anticipate things. When you can imagine that future state and then bend everybody and everything that has to go into that to your will, then you're a project manager. Beg, borrow, cheat, steal, lie. I mean, not literally, metaphorically, do whatever it takes to get that thing done. And that's not revolutionary. Anybody that's ever had a goal thinks that way. If you said, well, I want to go to college, and you had to do some stuff to get there. You had this idea of I want to be something. Anybody that's ever had a goal thinks like that. But it's all of those skills, project management skills, knowing how to build, people skills, hard and soft skills, all combined. You bring all that together, bring that to a head against building that thing. And then you're a PM. That's my definition.